Hello and welcome to Press TV Spotlight. I'm Marzieh Hashemi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the third round of indirect talks between Iran and the United States has taken place on Saturday in Oman. Now, those talks were held following the conclusion of the first technical meeting between the two sides. The Omani foreign minister continued his role as mediator of the indirect talks, which took over 4 hours. Now, the Iranian foreign minister has said that the talks will continue for now, and this round was much more serious. The U.S. delegation is saying that the talks were positive and productive. Well, what does it all mean, and where is this going? Well, stay with us as we take a look at it on this Spotlight. I'd like to welcome my guests to the program. Reza Vedadi, academic researcher and author out of Muscat. And Ali Rizk, security and political analyst out of Beirut. Welcome both of you to the program. Let me start it off with Reza in Muscat. Now, what is your overall assessment of the talks so far?
Well, today I just wanted to begin by sending my condolences to the deceased from the explosion that took place in the south of Iran. And I just want to pray for those who are injured to receive quick recovery. Regarding the negotiations, as we listened to Dr. Araghchi, explained that he didn't give too much information, but he indicated that there is the next stage of talks, which will be next week. He indicated there will be more specialist talks. I think the nuclear experts will be involved, technical experts. Maybe this means that there's some sticking points that they need to negotiate still, but there's some things that they've come to agreement with. And he did state that he's optimistic, but extremely cautious about going forward. So I think we need time, maybe a few more days, we'll find out more information coming out how the negotiations progressed so far.
Okay, well, Ali, are you surprised that the talks are continuing and will be going to a fourth round?
My condolences as well over the explosion in Bandar Abbas.
Thank you.
Regarding your question about the talks, I'm not surprised, no. I think that both sides want these talks to succeed, whether it be Iran or the United States. Of course, Iran has an interest in lifting of the sanctions. The United States also, I think, is quite desperate, even I would say, for a deal. I think that the mere fact that Donald Trump chose Steve Witkoff to lead the American delegation, I think this in of itself was a sign that the Americans were serious, because Steve Witkoff is much less hawkish towards Iran compared to other senior members in the American administration. For example, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has a very, very long record in being anti-Iranian and pro-Israeli. And I think that the fact that Witkoff was chosen, I think this was a sign from the Trump administration to Iran that there was indeed a serious attempt to reach some kind of a settlement. So no, based on that, I'm not surprised, and I was expecting that things will continue to progress in the way that they are progressing. Of course, you can't be 100% or overly optimistic. There remains some challenges. I think the biggest challenge is going to come from Israel and Israel's friends in Washington, or Israel's allies in Washington. And that includes, by the way, people in the American administration, people like Rubio, people like the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. These are figures, I think, who are more on the Israel page, or who agree more with Israel when it comes to Iran. So there are still some obstacles that could prevent a deal, but I think that the possibility of reaching a deal, it's more likely than not, I would say, in my opinion.
Okay, what about that, Reza, your perspective on what Ali says? Do you see that there is a schism in the Trump administration, parts of them being much more pro-Israeli than the others, or your assessment of, for example, why Trump picked the negotiator that he did? Do you feel, as Ali does, that actually he was trying to send a sign to Tehran?
Well, I would agree with Ali, and I would add to that Mr. Trump has sent Witkoff not only to negotiate with Iran, but he also sent him to negotiate with Russia regarding the Ukraine conflict, and he sent him to negotiate with for the peace initiative, or the short peace treaty that lasted in Israel and between Israel and Palestinian conflict. So it is clear that there's a great schism, great division between the cabinet or the administration or the regime of United States. And Donald Trump may have learned from his first term as a president to know who to send. We remember that he tried to negotiate a settlement or a deal with the North Korean leader, and unfortunately his administration, it was Michael Bolton at that time and Pompeo, which destroyed all his efforts. So this may have been a lesson that he's learned, which he's taken into this. And I do agree with Ali again that it's in the U.S. interest to find some kind of negotiated settlement with Iran. The U.S. has many problems, internal problems, external conflicts. China, major superpower in the world to deal with, it has problems with its economy. So Trump is looking at places where he can remove the tension and focus his efforts on other areas. So again, it's still early on to see how the negotiations pan out.
Well, Ali, in your perspective, what would it take for talks to proceed positively for Tehran? Which red lines would definitely have to be adhered to? And overall, what do you see as the main goal of Tehran in particularly in these talks?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? There's a lot of static coming from your side. Could you
Oh,
repeat
okay.
that
Sorry
question?
about that. In your perspective, what would it take for these talks to proceed positively for Tehran?
I think that there has to be a recognition of Iran being a nuclear power. When I say nuclear power, I don't mean a nuclear weapons power. I mean a country that has nuclear energy, that's recognized as a country that enjoys legitimate nuclear rights. I think this is one of the major Iranian demands, and it appears that the Trump administration is ready to accommodate that. Even Rubio, by the way, who is, as I said before, one of the more hawkish anti-Iranian figures in this administration, he hinted at the possibility of transferring the uranium stockpile to a third party. Presumably he was referring to Russia, I'm not sure. But there are indications that the United States is willing to make some of these concessions and to accept the fact that Iran is going to continue to enrich uranium at least to some kind of level. You know, again, I think there's a realist approach being pursued by the Trump administration towards Iran, and I think that's why the Iranians have been speaking positively, somewhat positively, about the course of the talks or about the way the talks are progressing. Again, you know, some people might, or some parties might intervene, might carry out some kind of escalation. We always have to keep our eyes on Israel, but for the time being, I'm quite positively surprised by the way the Trump administration is approaching the talks and the way it appears to be recognizing reality and not setting these impossible conditions, for example, like zero enrichment and other conditions like the issue of ballistic missiles, etc.
Okay. Well, Reza, now U.S. mediators have said that the talks were positive and productive. What do you think this means for Washington?
Well, as Ali rightly said, Donald Trump is trying his best to progress this negotiation, come to some kind of settlement. So, but then on the other hand, we know that a lot of the media, mainstream media in the US is against Donald Trump for various reasons, going back to his first administration. So we have to see that, is this guidance from the media saying that it's positive talks coming from the administration? Is it from other elites? As Ali rightly said, Israel and its allies and its supporters do want to sabotage these talks. And we don't know what this explosion that at Bandar Abbas happened. Inshallah, that it wasn't anything other than an accident. But it's not beyond the scope of Israel to try and sabotage this negotiation using not only members of Trump's administration, which are pro-Zionist and in the pocket of Israel, but using other methods of sabotage and terrorism and espionage. So again, we have to see. I mean, I don't really hold too much weight to what the US media says. I think we've noticed every negotiation, within a few days after that, more information has leaked out. So hopefully within the next few days, we'll get more details about what exactly was discussed and how far it went. The problem is you have the US negotiators saying something in one day. The next day, they will say something else. So one day they say we allow enrichment in Iran, and another day they will say no, we won't allow enrichment in Iran. So it's very difficult to trust the US administration or the media on that side. But we have to
Well, let me just jump in here with what you just said, Reza. So one day you're saying the negotiators are saying something, the next day something else. So what is that indicative of? I mean, is that a sign that really you cannot count on their word, they're not stable, or what's your assessment of that part of it?
I would say all of the above, and I would add that it's also a negotiation tactic, but it's not a professional negotiation tactic. It's a very amateurish negotiation tactic, because Iran, as I said in my previous discussions with you, Ayatollah Khamenei has laid down the red lines, and so America knows what red lines of the Iranian negotiation team is, and Iranian negotiation teams are their hand is fuller than it was 10 years ago. They're stronger militarily, they're stronger with their allies, relationships with their allies. They don't have 5 security member councils who may be voting against them. They have Russia and Iran, which will be on their side. So it's not the same negotiation power dynamics as it was 10 years ago. And so I don't know, this tactic that Donald Trump uses with every kind of negotiation that does, where it goes in and he says multiple things, try to distract people or give information to one side and another information to another side, but then in the actual negotiation, they're discussing something else. It's very interesting because Dr. Araghchi yesterday signed books that he's written a book recently that's come out, and at the Moscow Book Fair, which I visited today, they were selling his book. And his book, he introduces the tactics of negotiation. I personally wouldn't release this book until after the negotiations are completed, so that the US doesn't know the Iranian tactics. But if you look at his tactics, it's nothing parable or comparable to what you have with the Donald Trump regime. It's very professional, it's very conventional. So we have to see how these tactics that they're using will work.
Okay. Ali, the two sides wrote their concerns down and sent them to the other side, which responded in written form to the concerns. This is during the indirect meetings today. I mean, what are your thoughts about the way these talks are being carried out?
First of all, just a point regarding the issue of the United States changing its demands or issuing contradictory statements. I think it's not only about a negotiating tactic, I think it's also about domestic pressures. Steve Witkoff, he was the one who appeared to change tone when he said that, apparently hinted at the possibility or recognized that Iran can enrich. Then he spoke about zero enrichment. Then there was an about face again. I'm not sure that's a negotiating tactic as much as it's a result of internal domestic pressures, particularly from Israel. We all know the weight Israel carries within the US, its huge influence via AIPAC and other organizations or lobbies. So I think it's possibly more related to that and Trump trying to sound tough on Iran. Unfortunately, sounding tough on Iran is something considered to be politically popular in Washington. So I would attach it more to that perspective more than being about negotiating. It's possibly there is some kind of negotiating tactic involved, but I think also the domestic policy element is strongly present here. Regarding how the talks are progressing, again, I think that many people were doubtful. I remember on the eve of the first round in Sultanate Oman, many people had their doubts. Many people were saying this is unlikely to succeed or to progress. But now we're in the third round. The fourth round has already been scheduled for next week. We're already, by the way, in the technical consultations, and this is a very important development, which in of itself shows that significant progress is being made. So again, things appear to be going in a progressive manner, and reflects the fact that both parties want to reach an agreement, each, of course, for their own reasons. And if this continues, and if the Americans continue to stick to a realist approach, and I emphasize this point because I think it's very important, if they continue with a realist-based approach without setting impossible conditions, I think that we are headed indeed for an agreement.
Well, Ali, let me stay with you because you mentioned something about the Israeli regime and, of course, trying to divide the individuals that are speaking about the negotiations and everything. I want to look at that because, okay, so on the one hand, we say that there is a schism, there's a divide in this administration. On the other hand, we have seen since Donald Trump has come back to the presidency, a very, very pro-Zionist stance on so many issues. I mean, we've seen Netanyahu sitting on side of him when talking even about the start of the negotiations. So your perspective, where do you see Trump standing on this? I mean, is he being controlled by the Zionists or serving the bidding of the Zionists, or is it that he has some independence and wants to show perhaps a sign of success in foreign policy? I mean, how do you see it?
No, I don't see Donald Trump at all being controlled by the Zionists, despite his very pro-Israeli record, especially in his first term. But what you just referred to, when he announced the talks with Iran, when Netanyahu was sitting by his side, that doesn't reflect or that doesn't give the impression that Netanyahu controls him. I think it gives a rather opposite impression. I think this was a setback for Netanyahu. If you look at Netanyahu's body language when Trump made that announcement, Netanyahu was very disappointed, because I think what Netanyahu was thinking was that given Trump's anti-Iranian history in his first term, and given the fact that what we had in Syria, the Israeli war, also against Hamas, against Hezbollah, I think there was this perception in Netanyahu's mind that this was the golden opportunity. Everything is in place to carry out the attack, to issue the knockout blow, if you would like, to Iran. Then Trump comes out with this announcement, or declared his intention to hold talks, and so that doesn't reflect in any way whatsoever a tilt towards Netanyahu, or it doesn't show that Trump is controlled by Netanyahu. I think when it comes to Iran, at least, Trump is focusing on American interests rather than Israeli interests. It's quite similar, by the way, to the approach which Obama took when Obama was president. But I think with Trump, it's going to be much more difficult for Netanyahu to sabotage, or to try and sabotage the talks, because Trump has this pro-Israeli history, if you would like. That doesn't mean Netanyahu might not try. I think we can't put anything past Netanyahu. Netanyahu always brags about being able to steer American policy in the direction which he wants. So he may well choose to take this option again, although that would be a very big risk, given that Trump takes these kinds of issues personally, and that could be very, very damaging to Netanyahu's political future if he were to choose to sabotage these talks.
Okay. Well, Reza, can the U.S. be trusted to abide by its promises, considering it left the previous agreement, and what safeguards must be implemented in your perspective in order to ensure that if there is an agreement reached, that it will be adhered to?
So I believe from last experience that Iran had, Ayatollah Khamenei stated that the assurances and promises won't stack up this time. It has to be verified. So if Iran progresses with, for example, a good will measure, or part of whatever the staged agreement is, technically, whatever they do, then counter to that, the United States would have to activates one of its clauses. So, for example, removing Iranian banks from sanctions or removing whatever it is, it won't be enough where Iran does everything like last time, and then when it comes to the US turn, nothing happens. So I think assurances and promises, if from my understanding from the Iranian Foreign Ministry's negotiating tactics will be, it will have to be stages, and it has to be verifiable stages of progress as opposed to promises and assurances.
Well, Ali, isn't the reality that the U.S. knows that whether a deal is reached or not, that Iran will continue developing and advancing with its peaceful nuclear program, just as it's seen how far Tehran has developed since Washington left the JCPOA in 2018? How do you see this, or do you see this playing a role in these negotiations that's been initiated by the U.S.?
I think that, as I said before, the Americans up until now appear to be taking a realistic approach, recognizing that Iran is going to stick or to cling to its nuclear rights, enriching uranium, having a nuclear program for civilian purposes. I think there is an American recognition in this regard. At the same time, I think that the Americans fear that if they don't take this opportunity, and if they allow Israel, for example, to continue to escalate its policies, that could lead to the scenario which the Americans don't want, because they always say that they don't want Iran to possess nuclear weapons. And, there have been voices in Iran which have said that if this continues, this might change our nuclear weapon doctrine if this situation, if these escalatory policies continue. So there are these different factors involved which encourage the Americans more and more to seek an agreement with Iran, and also to recognize the fact that an alternative to seeking an agreement would be, number one, either war, which Trump doesn't want, and could lead to Iran changing its nuclear doctrine and then possessing or developing nuclear weapons which the United States also doesn't want. So these factors, I think, are heavily present in the way the Americans are approaching the situation. Another quick point is regarding American general foreign policy priorities. The American priority right now is China. Now the question is, how does Iran figure in with that priority? If you want to focus on China and the Asia Pacific, you have to limit your resources in other theaters, which includes Europe, where the Americans are withdrawing their military force, and also the Middle East. That also implicitly shows, or implicitly leads us to this conclusion that that's why the Americans also want an agreement with Iran, because going to war with Iran or escalation, that means more and more resources being wasted, if you would like, in this region, when the focus should be more on China. And I think the Iranians realize that for this reason, maybe Iran is, cautiously optimistic or confident that the Americans might stick to an agreement for the simple fact that it serves their priorities and their broader foreign policy agenda.
And on that note, I thank both of you for being with me. Reza Vedadi, academic researcher and author out of Muscat, and Ali Riz, security and political analyst out of Beirut. And thank you, viewers, for being with us on another Spotlight. I'm Marcia Hashemi. Hope to see you right here next time. Goodbye.